Fesgama Huladunya, Smisha Fiona McNeill, agus colleague Akam and Shaw Gábor, Hashin Glay Holicha Adi and Shaw and Jew. I'm just going to leave it there with the Gaelic. I hope Abigail's maybe slightly oversold how good my Gaelic is. It's still very much a work in progress. It gets a little bit painful after I move on past the basics. But we're really happy to be here today. Although I have to say, I was hoping to hold off on this talk until we could use it as an excuse to come up to Skye. It's always such a joy to be at Salmore. But you know, here we are. We really want to share this research with you. So we're going to have to do it online. So my background, as Abigail said, well, it's quite varied, which is why I'm currently in computing education, which is one hat, but also data integration has been what a lot of my past research has been on. So I'm interested in, you know, people build their own databases and they build them all, they use their own language, they use their own formalisms and terminology, and they all look really different. So it's really hard to share them. And how do you build tools that can automatically detect overlaps and say, okay, this is kind of similar and this is how it's similar. So that's my background. And I've worked with Trento for many, many years because they do a lot of quite world leading stuff in that area. And they have recently had more and more of a focus on the multilingual stuff, which is how I kind of came to be doing a bit of that. Although I have to say Gábor is much more of an expert in that area than I am. But I was at a workshop in Trento a couple of years ago, and one of the days of the workshop was looking at their project, the Multilingual project, and it was just so interesting. They had colleagues from all over the place. There's someone from South Africa where they have like 70 languages, people from Mongolia and all kinds of places. So my immediate thought was we should do this with Gaelic. It'd be great to get Gaelic involved in this. And Fausto Janquilia, who's the head of the group, was really keen. They don't have any Celtic languages involved at the moment. So I came home and I found a bit of money down the back of the sofa to do a small project. And I asked Abby to put me in touch with someone at Salmore that might be quite interested in working on this. And she put me in touch with Kevin, and as I'm sure most of you know, he has a really long history in creating and curating online resources for Gaelic, so he was a great person to collaborate with. So very often the way the kind of project we're doing would be approached would be to crowdsource a lot of translations or to get a bunch of students to do translations here and there. But that's quite hard in Gaelic because it's not so easy to find large numbers of speakers. So we thought that for this project, it's probably better just to get one person who would spend 6 months working on this. And there's a lot of advantages to that. So they would become a real, you know, they'd really understand what they were doing. And we were fortunate that Roddy was available to do that. So this is a very different standard, I guess. So you would always want to do this with a fluent speaker, but not necessarily with someone who's got a very deep appreciation of the language. So to have a poet working with us was really cool. And a lot of what he was doing, he didn't really need that depth of understanding, but I think for some aspects of the work, it was really good. So I'm going to now share my slides with you. I'll share my screen with you. Okay, so you should be able to see the slides. You see the slides? Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great, good. Okay, so first of all, we talk about Wordnet in the title, and I think that a lot of people who don't work in this kind of area don't really know what a Wordnet is. So a Wordnet is essentially a lexicon of the language. I'm going to show you the Princeton Wordnet. Oh, I have to go out of presentation mode. Oops. So the first Wordnet ever is the Princeton Wordnet, which is the English language Wordnet, and it was developed in the 90s in Princeton, and it's still the largest in the world. So what you can do on Wordnet, you can go into search. So say I put in a term like chair. What it's going to do, it tells me all the different, what these are called synsets of this word. A synset is a unique meaning of a word. So for chair, there's 5 noun synsets. One is a thing that you sit on, one is chair in an academic sense, chair of a meeting, and so forth, different ways in which the word's used. And there's also 2 verb synsets for chair, to chair a meeting. These 2 different synsets are fairly similar. You can go into these synsets. So if I go in here, I can look at the full hyponyms, And this is going to give me everything down from that, all the different kinds of chairs. So a chair can be an armchair, or it can be a barber chair, or a chair of state. And then within that, you go down to more specific terminology, sometimes going down to particular individuals. You can also look at the hyponyms, which is what's more general than that. So a chair is a kind of seat, which is a kind of furniture, and ultimately you get down to it's an entity. And wordnets are machine readable, so this is a really important function that they fulfill. And so when I'm developing my automated tools to try and figure out how similar different bits of data are, Wordnet would be a really important tool that I use to help figure that out. So why do we want Wordnet? So the original and largest Wordnet is English, but there are a lot of Wordnets in other languages. Why is that an important thing? So this is really important to make language machine readable and to facilitate automated tools for online content. And I think this is increasingly important. So we live so much online now that I think it's very difficult for an idea and an artifact to survive if it's just not visible online. And that seems to be true also for languages. So this paper, Digital Language Death, is very interesting, also a bit depressing, where Kornai is pointing out that languages that don't exist online just become much less relevant to their speakers. That is especially true for the young whom interacting online is so much part of their lives. A language that they can't interact with at all online is just going to be deemed less relevant by them. So it's very useful, very important for language survival that languages are as visible as possible on the web. And Wordnet, developing a Wordnet for a language is maybe a part of the puzzle of how you can make that happen. Okay, oh, sorry, the slides on. What's going on here? Okay, so there's two main approaches to how, if you want to create a Wordnet, a new Wordnet for a language, how do you do that? There's two main approaches. Firstly, you can take the existing Wordnet, which is usually the Princeton Wordnet, and choose a subset of that, or you can choose all of it, but nobody's ever actually done that. The Princeton Wordnet is still the biggest. And you translate all those synsets into your language. This is really a useful thing to do because so many people have done it this way that you automatically, if you align with Princeton Wordnet, you automatically align with all of the other languages that are also aligning with it. So you get these free translations into a very large number of languages, which is great. Another way to do it is to take an existing resource in your language. So for example, to take a Gaelic thesauri and then to develop the synsets yourself in a way that particularly reflects the language that you're doing it for. This is much more difficult and time consuming, and it needs a lot of expertise to do that. And then you end up with something that's kind of siloed. It doesn't automatically link in with other things. The synsets that you create will probably have quite a big overlap with the English synsets, but they're not going to be the same. But I'm sure you can see the drawback of pushing everything through the Princeton Wordnet, which is that you then begin to see all of the other languages online are being seen through this prism of English. And you can only really express things in any language that can be expressed in English, which is obviously very limiting, and it introduces a large amount of linguistic bias. So the approach we took was to primarily follow the translation approach of translating into Princeton Wordnet because it was possible with the resources that we had and because it ties in with this multilingual vision, but also to try to consider aspects of the linguistic bias, particularly through looking at lexical gaps. So the things in English that you can't directly say in Gaelic, and to some extent vice versa, although we haven't looked at that quite as much. So what existing resources are there already and how have we used them? So there are a lot of online resources for Gaelic and Kevin is the expert on all of those, but these are primarily designed to be human accessible rather than machine readable. There is actually, before we started this project, there was already an existing Wordnet for Gaelic, and this was something that came out of the Extended Open Multilingual Wordnet project, where some researchers took a bunch of Wiktionaries, an online dictionary, and there is a Wiktionary for Gaelic, although it's not, Kevin tells me it's not that widely used because it's not as complete as a lot of other Gaelic resources. but it exists. And so they developed tools that could automatically translate a Wiktionary into a Wordnet aligned with the Princeton Wordnet. So Gaelic was one of those languages. It's not a bad size. It's got 5,500 synsets and 4,500 words. It doesn't have any Gaelic language glosses, so it's just got the words, not any explanation. And it's because it's automatically done, the quality is maybe not as high as we would like. So what we wanted to do is to create a lexico-semantic resource which was of a usable size to cover a considerable part of common vocabulary. So we wanted to think about what language are people actually going to use, how can we create a resource that's actually going to contain as much of that as is feasible. And we wanted it to be high quality through the human supervision that we were going to create it under. And crucially, that's exploitable both by humans, but also computationally. So how we went about doing this, first of all, we had to think about what subset of Princeton Wordnet are we going to translate. Then there was the translation process, which was the majority of the project, and that was done by Roddy. And then the merging with the existing Wordnet. So the existing Wordnet is not as high quality as what we would like ours to be, but it exists and it's a useful resource. So it makes sense to make use of that as much as we can. So when we created ours, we then merged it with the existing one. And finally, validation. So validation is really important for a resource that you're creating through crowdsourcing or through a bunch of people that you don't know so well. Because we got Roddy to do it, we already had a very good idea of the quality of the resource that was going to be created. But validation is still really important. It's still important to have statistics about your resource that you can share with others to demonstrate to others the quality. And also, I think a few kind of interesting things came up in the process of the validation, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Okay, so when we were thinking about which parts of Princeton Wordnet would we translate, we were primarily going for general language, but we didn't want to restrict it only to the very, very commonly used terms, because we wanted to have a bit of a look in the lexical diversity, which comes in a little bit more, not necessarily actually, it does also come in at the very general level, but it comes in a little bit more when you get a little bit more specialized, but not to get right down into domain terms, which people are probably going to be using quite a lot less. We didn't want it to overlap with the existing Wiktionary because that would create just a larger, more useful resource if we kept it separate, except we just wanted a small overlap with the existing one so we could do a little bit of cross-validation. And we decided to favour nouns and verbs, primarily nouns at the moment, because they're very useful parts of speech. So with this in mind, we selected 13 subtrees of noun synsets, and these covered things like natural object, body part, feeling, and so forth. And then we had a 14th set that contained just over 1,000 verb synsets, which of commonly used verbs. So what we said to Roddy got all these subtrees to translate. We had a few technical issues with that actually, which did delay the project a bit, and I think frustrated Roddy quite a lot. But so he was to go through translating these, but he was also to make his own decisions about what was worth translating. So if he considered a synset to be highly technical or a whole subtree to be highly technical, then he just wouldn't translate it. So as you might have seen when I was showing you chair, you do quite quickly get down to very, very specific things, which are maybe not really the most useful things to be translating. And also he was to identify lexical gaps where there was no Gaelic lexicalization of an English word. And for that, he would either just mark this as a gap and provide a Gaelic gloss for it that was explaining Gaelic what the term meant, but not give a Gaelic word for it. Or he would invent a neologism. So he'd create a new Gaelic word to fill that lexical gap. So he did this in a conservative way. So usually this was either a direct translation of the English lemma, or he would use an existing Gaelic word and adjust it with prefixes or suffixes or whatever in a standard Gaelic way to create a new word that was plausibly Gaelic. And I think from a research point of view, the lexical diversity that the lexical gaps are revealing are really a very interesting part of it. So all in all, we chose, within the 14 sets that we chose, there were 10,500 synsets, of which Roddy translated just under 9, and about just over 1.5 were not translated. That was either because he made the decision that they were too specialised to bother with, or because he marked them up as lexical gaps. Of the 9,000 that he did translate, around 75% of them he translated into, mostly just into one Gaelic word, although sometimes he put synonyms. Almost 25% of them were covered by neologisms. So there's a lot of new words coming in. And there were a lot of words in English words in there that didn't have existing Gaelic counterparts. Almost all of the synsets were provided with a Gaelic gloss. 264 were given example phrases, which is obviously a very low percentage. This is common in Wordnets, actually, that most of them don't have very many example phrases, other than the English one, which is more complete. But I think that this is an area we would really like to increase that. I think that's a useful artifact. So that's somewhere where we'd like to improve this a bit. So the merge was of the two Wordnets, the one that Roddy produced and the one that had already automatically been created from the Wiktionary. We merged them using the Universal Knowledge Core. Now, I'm not really going to say anything about that because Gábor is going to be talking about that later, but this is the resource that they've been developing in Trento in their multilingual project. But the UKC is a very interesting thing. So one thing that Fausto really said to me, it said at that workshop that really struck a chord with me, was that at the moment, we know that this is a problem for not even for minority languages, for all sorts of languages, their online visibility. And who is actually working on this at the moment? Mostly the people working on this at the moment are Google, and Google are doing a lot of really great stuff. And Google Translate is very useful. That always came in handy when I was trying to write things in Gaelic, although Google Translate in Gaelic is not brilliant quality because there's not a lot of online documents in Gaelic, which makes the automated process more difficult. But this is not a great situation because Google is a private company. It isn't accountable to anybody. It's black box. We don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it. And this is not really a very good way to preserve the world's languages. So this is in some way a more kind of community-based way of trying to bring a huge range of languages into the internet era. So anyway, the importation was monotonic, so we didn't change anything. We just, if we had a word from a synset that already existed, we would add that word to the synset, so it would be a new synonym. If the synset didn't already exist, then it was created. We kept multiple orthography, so if there were different spellings of the same word, we kept both spellings. And the idea behind this was that maybe it's of value to preserve different dialects and different ways that communities use spelling. I don't know whether this is useful. You know, in GME schools, they have this kind of unified Gaelic that is sort of, I guess, in some ways accepted as standard. And maybe it's more useful just to keep those spellings. I don't know. But at the moment, we've kept the different orthographies. Then we did the validation. So the validation was done by Kirsty MacDonald, who I'm sure some of you know. She does a lot of translation work, and she has not only very good Gaelic, but very good language skills. So first of all, we did the automated cross-validation between the two imported Wordnets. And then Kirsty went over most of what Roddy had done to give her view on it. So here you can see the translations, the very, very high level of correctness, which is just what we'd expect because of the way that we did the translations. And most of the incorrect translations were just errors. But I think there's maybe something more interesting coming in the neologisms and the gaps. So almost 10% of the things that Roddy identified as gaps, Kirsty thought weren't gaps and that words existed. And for the neologisms as well, 17% she thought they were correct, but they weren't new. So I think maybe we don't know exactly what's going on there, but it might be something interesting to do with the way Gaelic is used in different communities. So I think there weren't words for these words, there weren't translations for these words in the resources that Roddy was using, or I assume in Roddy's own use of the language. But Kirsty was aware of words. So where is this coming from? Maybe it's to do with the fact that Kirsty has kids in GME, and maybe in the schools there's a lot of kind of language creation going on as they're trying to bring in the full life of the children into a Gaelic medium environment. I don't know, but I think that's quite interesting. So these are the results. I mean, this is what the total numbers in the end. I won't speak about these very much, but what we were quite proud of, there's over 1,000 wordnets at the moment, and the Gaelic Wordnet, the unified Gaelic Wordnet we created, is currently 30th in the world by number of words and 25th by number of synsers. So that's not bad for minority language, although I don't know if that's even still true. That was true a couple of months ago when we wrote the paper. But it's a significant resource that we can do useful things with. This is a comparison. So the first column is the unified Scottish Gaelic Wordnet. The second one is the one that we translated in this project. The third one is the one we imported that was automatically created from the Wiktionary, and the fourth one is the Princeton Wordnet. So this could potentially be saying interesting things about differences in languages if we had better coverage, but as we don't, it isn't. You can see the polysemy of Gaelic of the Gaelic Wordnet is quite a bit higher than of the English Wordnet. This is probably to do with the fact that the subsets we chose to translate were the more common general language, so words were more likely to have multiple meanings, whereas the Princeton Wordnet includes all of that stuff, but also quite a lot of domain-specific terminology, which probably is less likely to have multiple meanings. The synonyms in the Gaelic Wordnet are significantly less than in Princeton Wordnet, and you can see from our translation there are very few synonyms. This was kind of a choice that Roddy made to just get as many different translations done and not spend as much time on getting the synonyms in. So that is a bit of a gap in the resource at the moment. I think it'd be very useful to spend some time improving that. So that is just a quick overview of what we did with Kevin and Roddy and the artifact that resulted from that and why we think that's useful. But now I'm going to hand over to Gábor, who's going to give you a lot more of the bigger picture and how this fits into that. If I can stop sharing.
Thank you. So yeah, so I'm Gbor Bella. I'm from the University of Trento, from Italy. Actually, I don't speak a single word of Gaelic, so I will try not to pronounce a single word in Gaelic during this presentation for fear of sounding ridiculous. So on the other hand, I'm one of my research interests is multilingualism and computational linguistics. I'm from a computer science department. I'm a computer scientist. So I'm not interested in languages in themselves, but in developing resources, language resources and tools for languages. So this is, and this is what I like to show to you first. So I like to show to you this famous, not yet famous, universal knowledge core that Fiona has mentioned. So I'll share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see it. So this is what I'm showing to you is a website, which is a brand new website. Actually, it has not yet gone online. It will go online tomorrow, if everything goes well. So I'm showing it to you on my local computer. So this is actually a front end to a huge database that we have been developing in the last years, and which contains the lexicons of around 1,000 languages, and it contains over 2 million words, including Scottish Gaelic. So it is not just a collection of lexicons, one next to the other. The lexicons are totally interconnected on the word meaning level, and it is completely formal, computer processable, which allows a lot of interesting computations and visualizations to do with this data. We are just starting to explore all the possibilities. So I would like to first to show you this website, and this will put into context a little bit what it means to have a word net in a language, the Gaelic Wordnet, and some first ideas of what you can do with it. So first, I will go to this projects page, This lists a couple of projects on which we, the University of Trento, has been working with respect to this UKC resource. So the Unified Scottish Gaelic Wordnet is among them. So this Wordnet actually has its own dedicated website. So if I click on it, I'm taken there. I'm sure you know this landscape. I had a very nice time when I went there for this work. So this Wordnet that we developed has its own website, as you can see. So this is already online. This website, this has been online for at least a year. And from here, you can actually download the resource. You can download the Wordnet. There's a link. It's a free resource, so it's the license is a totally free license. As Fiona said, the Wordnet is aligned with the Princeton Wordnet, with the English Wordnet, so you get the translation of every word meaning to English for free, basically. So this was just to show you that the website exists and the resource exists online. Now to come back to this Universal Knowledge Core website. So apart from this list of projects, you can actually browse all the lexicons. So here you see basically the map of all the lexicons that we have in the UKC. Currently, I'm showing to you something like 700 languages, where each circle is proportional, the size of each circle is proportional to the lexicon size that we have of that language. And the colors, of course, correspond to the language families. So, as you can see, we have languages from all over the world. And actually, I'm not going to start from Gaelic. I'm going to start from another language, from Breton, because I'm in Brittany now. Actually, I've moved to Brittany from Italy. I'm still working for Italy, but I live in Brittany. My wife is from here, so I live in a Breton-speaking land. So I'd like to start from here. I select the Breton language from this list of 700 languages. So actually, I'm living in a small village called Le Pouldu. So I wanted to do a little bit of etymology with respect to just for the sake of example, on the name of this place, Le Pouldu. So it's Pouldu. It consists of actually two words, poul and du. So if I type in the first one, I hope it's all visible what I'm doing. So I type in the Breton word, I get the meaning of it, a structure providing a place where boats can land, people or goods. So if I click on it, I get on the map all the languages that lexicalize this word meaning. And if I hover over the English one, then you can see that it actually means dock in English, this Breton word. Then let's see the other part of the place name, du. I'm sure some of you speak Breton. This means the quality of or state of the achromatic color of least lightness, which in a laborious language means black, basically. So it means basically this place name is Black Dock, where I'm living. So on the right hand side, you can see that actually a graph. You can see that these terms are embedded in a hierarchy of word meanings. So some of which are lexicalized in the current language, which is Breton, some of them which aren't. So the word darkness, for example, is not present in this rather small Breton dictionary that we are having. Another interesting feature, however, is that so when you have such a big graph with so many languages, you can do a lot of computation over it. And we had a past project with a colleague where we developed basically an automated identifications of identification of cognates across languages. And this way we identify the more than 8 million cognate pairs over something like 400 languages. And these cognate relationships are all now integrated into this UKC. So if I click here, sense relations, I get some of them. So you see that this Breton word do is actually cognate with the Scottish Gaelic one that I'm not going to pronounce, right? And also the Irish one. So I can click on it actually, and then I'm taken to the Scottish Gaelic meaning of it. So which is the same meaning, but the Scottish Gaelic lexicalization. So this is the first example of a lot of new things that you can extract from such a resource by computational means, provided that your input is formalized and inserted into the database. And we were able to do this because the Scottish Gaelic Wordnet that we developed was represented in a formal computer readable manner. So I would like to show you some other things here from this website. Visualizations. So this is another thing that I recently developed. This is a visualization based on all this cognate data that we computed. I'm computing lexical similarities between languages over the entire cognate data. So what you're seeing here are about 100 languages. Each dot is a language. The color is the language family. And I actually, so we wanted to check whether the cognates that we extracted are able or not to hint at the closeness, the lexical and eventually the linguistic, phylogenetic similarity of the languages or not. And the result, so as you can see, is to a large extent yes. So if I zoom in, then you will see the language names as well. Okay. I think because of Zoom, the zooming is not working perfectly. But anyway, you see, so the colors. So this is computed in a totally automated way, and you see that languages from the same family, such as Slavic or Romance or Germanic, tend to aggregate together. And this is to some extent true for the Celtic languages as well, which are in dark green. So for the Celtic languages, generally we have less data, so the relationships are not as strong. I think there's a lot of borrowing going on from other languages such as English, which also is taken into account in this image. So, but you do see, however, that that Breton and Welsh are sort of close together. Irish and Scottish Gaelic are sort of close together, and so on. Okay, another feature on this website is word translation. This is just basically so to show that you get these things for free. Once you have that big interconnected graph of all the languages, you can translate between any language and any language. So provided that you have the words, I'm talking about word translation here, and provided that we have the words in both languages. So I can translate, for example, in between, Scottish Gaelic. So let's do a little experiment. How do I say blue? Okay, so I'm getting, I don't speak Gaelic, but I've discovered something very interesting here. So, I see these two words appearing for the word blue, but then you have blue, blueness, greenness. Okay, so let's see green. Okay, I have some other words. And let's see gray as well. So then I have this word here, leer. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but this also appeared earlier, right? So here we have a little bit of fuzziness with respect to colors. And so from our work with Kirsty, our validator, I remember that the way you designate some of the colors does not map perfectly with the English senses of the colors. So here we have some fuzziness in how these colors are mapped. So now we are coming to the problem of lexical gaps, right? And language diversity. So this is something, so this is basically the core of our research with respect to lexical semantics. It's language diversity, how untranslatability, and how languages cannot express exactly the same concepts. So on this, I have a presentation, if I can find it. Right. Can you, I hope you can see this. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I gave this very pompous title, ridiculously pompous title of Gaelic and the Word, Unity and Diversity. I will try to fill this with meaning. So I'm not starting with Gaelic, I'm starting with something else, the word rice. So rice is expressed in lots of ways in different languages. In some languages, there's this very generic term that corresponds to the English rice, like the French riz. In other languages, there's nothing, and there's no word corresponding to this very general level of meaning. They have more specific words, like in Swahili, where they have, and Hindi and Japanese and Chinese and lots of other languages, where they have different word, a different word for cooked rice and for uncooked rice. And then we can go even deeper, like uncooked white rice, etc. These are all different words. Rice for them is a very important concept. So if you think about this is important beyond beyond just linguistics. This is also important computationally. Let's take a machine translator like Google Translate. So if you want to translate a sentence like I'm eating rice, there's no into Swahili, let's say, there's no equivalent in Swahili for the word rice. So you have to choose from the ones that are available. So it is important whether you choose the uncooked or the cooked rice. So because if you choose the word for uncooked rice, then you are introducing an unintended meaning, right? I am eating raw rice. So this is not what people mean, probably. So being able to represent this diversity computationally is important. And this is where the unity comes in, which I mentioned in the title. So we, in the UKC, the Universal Knowledge Core, we are able to interconnect these different meanings into a single graph. At least we strive towards this goal. So as you can see, so this graph is based on the broader, narrower relationships. And you see all the different meanings, the rows that you had in the table there, corresponding to nodes of this graph. And then you can attach the language, the words from the different languages to the nodes of this graph. And this is how we represent diversity in a unified language diversity in a unified manner. As part of this project, we did find lexical gaps with respect to Gaelic in both directions. So these are just a few examples. In total, we identified, so Roddy identified around 600 gaps in Gaelic, so English words that don't have Gaelic equivalents, such as these four here, like follow-up, cliffhanger, name dropping, or turf war. And then Kirsty generously offered us a list of 60 to 70 gaps, so words that are specific to Gaelic that don't have English equivalents. You see a couple of ones here that I'm sure you understand. So coming to gaps, of course, this is a difficult problem of lexicography, how to identify a gap. And Fiona has already mentioned this, so I don't need to repeat that. But basically, when Roddy was working, doing this translation-based lexicography from English towards Gaelic, he had to make choices. He had to, for a given word, he had to choose whether, if there was no clear equivalent, he had to choose whether to consider it as a lexical gap, or maybe it's not a lexical gap, it's simply a domain term. It's too specialized, so, and he's not a domain expert, so he was not supposed to translate specialized terms. He was just supposed to skip them. Or maybe it's interesting to introduce a neologism, to coin a new Gaelic word. So these choices are up to the lexicographer. There's always a gray area. So let's between these three categories. So if I say the word heart, for example, is it a medical term? Well, not really, right? I would say it's a general term, but if I say heart attack, maybe still. But if I say cardiac arrest, well, it's not very clear whether it's a domain term or it's part of general language. And of course, I can go deeper and deeper. So here I'm showing a couple of examples where choices had to be made. So you see that all of them, to some extent, are from the domain territory, from music, politics, baseball, physics, mineralogy. But some of them are more specific than others. So the last one especially seems very specific, a very specific domain term. So this was not translated. The first one and the third one were translated. Well, they were actually, so neologisms were introduced by Roddy. And then there were two of them that were considered to be gaps. So this is up to the lexicographer every time. So you saw that so identifying lexical gaps, even if it's not trivial, it is pretty straightforward when you're following such a translation approach from English towards Gaelic. But if you are doing the translations in this direction, you will of course not identify any gap that goes in the other direction. So words that are specific to Gaelic, and we are very interested in those terms as well, because we are researching language diversity. So there, different approaches have to be used. So of course, if we had a dictionary in the other sense, like a Gaelic English bilingual dictionary, which I'm sure you have, that could be used to identify these Gaelic specific words. Experts can provide such words, such as Kirsty, who provided us with the 70 gaps that we integrated into the UKC. and native speakers in general. So people really love this kind of question. So what are the words in my language that cannot be translated into any other language or to English? So people tend to get enthusiastic about this kind of challenge. So there's a potential for crowdsourcing, and then there's a lot of intrinsic motivation in people to provide answers to such questions. But also there's another possibility of cross-lingual studies. So I could take not only Scottish Gaelic, but Celtic languages in general. And I'm sure that there are terms that are word meanings that are specific to this, the Celtic culture or Celtic languages in general. And that kind of information could be used as well. So there are lots of possibilities. And I wanted to finish my presentation here. So this is basically looking for language diversity and lexical gaps is a possible continuation of our work. This is something that we would like to pursue, and we are really open and to collaboration, also with any of you if you are interested in this topic. So this is my last slide to tell you about a foundation that on which we are working, the Data Scientia Foundation, which is so this foundation is about collaborating on diversity in computation, diversity in language, in perception and knowledge. Well, I'm more interested and I'm responsible in the language area. So we build systems that provide a wider access to data in the local language, described by local knowledge in ways that are locally relevant. So of course, when you work on a language, you have to work with local people. We, from our headquarters in Trento, cannot develop a resource on Scottish Gaelic, not being able to speak the language. So we always collaborate with people. We already have a lot of collaborators from lots of places in the world. So we are open to do this with anyone if you are interested. We have the let's say more formal way of organizing such a collaboration. There's a website for this Data Scientia Foundation, and the UKC resource, which I said would go online tomorrow, will be available on this web address. And this is where I'm stopping. Thank you very much.